A pivotal year upcoming for the Florida Gators in 2024. Questions surround Billy Napier's program, helping us break down all things Florida in the 2024 season. Friend of the show and good friend of mine, Nick De La Torre of Gators Online, does a fantastic job of covering all things Florida Gators. Nick, what's going on, my friend? Appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, just doing some Florida things, getting through Hurricane, Tropical Storm Debbie, whatever this thing is. But, I'm a South Florida guy. It's no big deal for me.
And glad to hear you're safe, Nick. Obviously, again, I know it ain't no big deal for a Florida man like yourself. And by the time this comes out, by the way, I'll go ahead and highlight this. Before we dive into anything else, you guys already know at this point, we will be. And, Nick, I'm excited to see your beautiful face. Week 1 of the 2024 season, SEC Unfiltered, are going to be there for the Miami game. So looking forward to hanging out with all you guys. I told you this, I think, in Omaha and maybe even in Dallas. Florida's got some of the most fun characters on the beat that I've met thus far. So I can't wait to get back down there and kick it with you guys. But let's talk some Florida football here, Nick, because, again, there's a lot to get into. Before we look ahead, let's look back at 2023, if you don't mind. A 5-7 year for the Gators, 3-5 in SEC play, something that really stuck out to me, Nick, because knew Florida had some struggles defensively last year, right? In the last 5 games of the 2023 season, Florida defensively allowed 38.2 points per game during those games. And it was a hot start to the year, but you saw it tail off last 5, equates in a 5-7 record. How do you feel Florida fans look back on year 2 of the Billy Napier era? And how do you look back on what was I think it's safe to say a disappointing year 2 of his tenure?
Certainly disappointing. Would rather we not go back, but here we are, Chris. The Florida fans are still clamoring that Billy needed to get a play caller and the offense is boring and it stinks. And really, if you look at that last stretch, Jaden Daniels had 700 total yards in Baton Rouge against Florida. You weren't winning that game. I was joking with somebody on the field before that game, and I was like, you think Jaden will get 500 yards today? Or LSU will get 500 yards today? And I should have just said Jaden Daniels. Not the entire LSU offense. But Billy Napier says he puts himself and all of his coaches through a rigorous self-evaluation. You have to evaluate yourself, bring it back to the coach. This is what I think I did well, what we need to do better. And Napier does it for himself as well as the team. In 6 years of being a head coach, he had never fired an assistant coach. He fired Corey Raymond and Sean Spencer within 36 hours of the season ending. So pretty clear that he was doing that evaluation as the season was going on and knew that they had to make changes. Overall on defense, they made 3 coaching changes, 13 new players, whether it's portal or new guys coming in. So clearly they thought the defense was the issue. And listen, no Florida fan was happy about the defense, but I think they're louder about the offense. It was a step back for Florida. You made a bowl game in year 1, and then you don't in year 2. You were a game away with 5 games left, a game away from hitting the over, from cashing those preseason over tickets. And then you don't hit the over. And I always say it, Chris, the smart men in Vegas, smart men and women in Vegas who build palaces in the desert don't keep building billion-dollar spheres for being wrong. And they were not wrong in 2023.
Nick, you mentioned it, Billy Napier going in his 3rd season. Let's shift gears to that. The overall vibe surrounding Billy Napier, it's interesting as we get closer to kickoff in the 2024 season. I think I've told you this. I keep leaning towards Billy's going to be safe. Again, barring some crazy, just completely falling apart, if you will. I think Billy's back in 2025. But from the Florida Gators fan base perspective, what are they saying? How do they feel? I've heard the typical half the fan base thinks they're going 10-2 or 11-1, and half the fan base thinks it's time to move on, right? So, what do you gauge? What's the sense you get in regards to not just what folks on Twitter or Facebook or social media are saying, but the support system within the program? Obviously, Scott Strickland being tied to the hip with him. Like what's the overall vibe right now around Billy Napier going into his 3rd year, which is a pivotal year, no doubt?
From the fans, there's cautious optimism. I think when you go into it, every SEC schedule is hard. Obviously, we've spent all the last 5 months talking about Florida's schedule, but every SEC schedule is hard. I think what Texas and Oklahoma will find out is it's not just playing Alabama or playing Georgia or playing Texas. It's playing Texas and then playing Georgia and then playing Alabama and then playing LSU, and that's a month of games for you. You don't really get the Rutgers week off unless you've got Vandy on the schedule, and that wasn't even good for Florida in 2022. But I think the biggest thing is, one, Florida's president stepped down. He has his wife's going through some health issues, so they have an interim president, Kent Fox. Does an interim president sign off on making a move that's going to cost the UAA $25 million just for one coach? Then you buy out the other coaches and hire a new coaching staff. I also think that Billy was given, when he took the job, was said, you're going to have time to run your process and do your process. And then there's the boosters. And if you buy season tickets, you're technically a booster. But the boosters who can stroke checks that affect change are tired of stroking checks for change. It's kind of become a revolving door at Florida where you get 4 years, and if it's not where you need it to be and you're not contending for a national championship in 3-4 years, you're out. And then you're stroking those checks and you're hitting reset. And Florida's almost in that Tennessee bubble where after Phil Fulmer, they were just a revolving door of coaches. And I think the guys who write checks with multiple commas are tired of doing that and hitting reset. So I think there is more patience from the Bull Gators that can affect change. And certainly there's a belief inside the building that Billy Napier will get it done. I think it's his deepest roster. That might not matter because of the schedule. But if we're talking about those men and women in Vegas, I would encourage gamblers to hit the over on Florida's 4.5. I think that's a little low.
So, Nick, you mentioned the roster. Let's dive into this 2024 Gators football team. We'll start on the offensive side of the ball. Obviously, Graham Mertz returning as QB1, and he was a guy surprised everyone last year. I mean, heck, I was someone I had to eat crow. I had him 14th out of 14 quarterbacks going in the season, and my goodness, I mean, he surpassed those expectations, certainly. But he returns. You got to replace Ricky Pearsall and Trevor Etienne. One leaves for the NFL, one leaves in the portal. Eugene Wilson looking to emerge as the top playmaker at wide receiver. Is a guy I know you're really excited about, and so is Florida as well. Shamir DK, some big-time potential from him. There are others as well in that wide receiver room that folks are really excited to see. Montrell Johnson taking over as the RB1. Trayon Webb, the freshman behind him in that backfield. I want to get your comments on the status on Montrell in just a couple minutes, because I know you dropped that story, that breaking news of him with his knee and the scoping or what have you. Arla Sportingham back at the tight end spot, 3 of 5 return on the offensive line. It was an offensive line that wasn't great last year, but you did add Brandon Crenshaw Dixon from San Diego State. I know that's a guy they expect to slide in there and I believe either start or be in the rotation. So when you look at the Florida offense, Nick, and you mentioned fans want more excitement. They want Graham Mertz to go more down the field, right? They call him Charlie check down or what have you. But again, with his completion percentage, what are you expecting from this Florida offense? And again, what does it look like for Billy Napier in year 3? You mentioned they're deep and they've been. And also, too, if you want to address the Montrell Johnson thing, you dropped the breaking news. He's week to week. Give people an idea of the status update. You expect him back for week 1. And then again, the rest of the offense, your expectations for them.
Yeah, we can start with Montrell. It's a tough blow for Florida, but it's not an ACL tear, out for the season type of injury. I think he wasn't feeling well. We went out to practice. I believe it was Saturday, and I didn't see him. And then you start asking questions like, hey, why isn't RB1 out there? Had the arthroscopic knee surgery. A lot of people on social media were like, what do you mean it's routine? And I'm like, well, it's not routine if I'm doing the surgery, but it's an in and out procedure where you're walking within 2 to 3 days. And then also in saying that it's routine is that when they went in, they didn't find anything that, okay, well, hey, we're actually going to have to cut and we're actually going to have to do real surgery. So there's some hope inside Florida's football facility that Montrell can be back for Miami. I think if he is back for Miami, then everything went perfectly in terms of the surgery, which we were told went well. And then in terms of the rehab, and everyone's different, and every rehab can be different even for the same person. So I think that might be optimistic to get him back from Miami, but people inside the building believe that's a realistic scenario. We'll have to wait and see there. I thought Florida's running back room was very deep. Despite losing Trevor Etienne, it's very much less deep without Montrell. Montrell was a big part of saying, hey, they're deep, because I thought Montrell might be a guy who carried the ball 75% of the time in the running back room. And then you had some nice complementary pieces. Now those complementary pieces have to be primary pieces, with Trayon Webb probably being the next guy up, true sophomore from Jacksonville. Obviously, Jaden Ball, everyone is the guy everyone saw at the spring game, 12 touches for 77 yards. Katie Daniels is a guy who ran for 2,000 yards in his junior and senior year in high school in Mississippi, playing at a high level of Mississippi. I think it was 5A or 6A he was playing there. So younger guys. And then one that we don't really talk about was a junior college transfer last year. Didn't get any playing time in 2023, but Jacoby Jackson. So there are 4 guys back there. Also, a 5th walk-on, Marco Rubio's son, Anthony Rubio, is in the room as well. So Florida feels okay. Obviously, you feel much more okay if Montrell was healthy and when he's able to play. It'll be interesting if you can play against Miami at 85, 80, 90%. You can kind of take next week off with Samford, you'd hope. You'd hope. And then you get, Texas A&M in week 3. So it'll be interesting to see how he plays. I think the biggest thing for me, one, is Florida's offensive line. They have to be better. Graham Mertz can't get sacked 30-plus times again. You need them to stay healthy. Austin Barber was playing through shoulder, wrist, hand, ankle, foot injuries all last year. So the guy that we thought was going to take the next step and potentially declare for the NFL draft last year, we never got to see him because of the injuries he was going through. Kingsley Iguakin, when he did try to play, was more of a disservice to himself, which shows him not getting drafted, and disservice to the team. You have to tip your hat to a guy for trying to go out there and give it his all, but with where his high ankle sprain was, he just wasn't effective. Luckily, you found Jake Slaughter, who turned out to be a really good center, but Florida needs to find a solid 5. I had a Mountain West coach I was speaking with after Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon transferred, and he questioned the take. So I think that's part of the reason why Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon's in the SEC, because he's got coaches questioning if he is SEC caliber, and that's something he wants to prove this year. So Florida's still trying to find who those starting 5 will be. They feel like they have 8 or 9 guys that they can count on, but still trying to find those starting 5. And then can Graham Mertz take that year 2 transfer portal quarterback leap that we've seen guys take? Kyler Murray, Joe Burrow, 2 guys who won Heisman's after transferring. So I think the pieces around Graham at running back, once you get Montrell back with Eugene Wilson, Chim Dike, and Elijah Badger, there's also some young guys, Aiden Mizell, Andy Jean, Khalil Jackson. Florida has a bunch of guys that can help Graham, and I think they'll play better around him. But I think it all starts up front with the offensive line, because if Graham Mertz is running for his life and picking himself up off the turf again at the rate that he was last year, I think the offense will look very similar as it did last year.
Nick, let's switch over to the defensive side of the football. Again, this was a big problem area for Florida last year. As you mentioned, I already talked about what happened during the last 5 games, led to the defensive line coach and secondary coaches being fired. As you mentioned, Ron Roberts has been hired on staff to assist Austin Armstrong, the defensive coordinator. You get Cam Jackson back on the inside, Kelsey Collins, TJ Searcy are guys taking on bigger roles this year. Shamar James is back at linebacker. You've also added Grayson Pup Howard from South Carolina. You get Jason Marshall Jr. back at corner, Jordan Castell back at safety, and you added Asa Turner and DJ Douglas from the transfer portal in the secondary. All in all, what does that equate to in your mind for Florida's defense? Do you see that group taking a big step forward in 2024?
Yeah, 3 new coaches, 13 new players. I remember talking to Will Harris on early signing day. He had just gotten the job as secondary coach. And I asked him, hey, have you gotten a chance to look at your guys yet? Like, you just got here. You didn't really have a hand in recruiting the early signing class, but have you gotten a chance? He said, I'm checking my iPad, and I'll watch that on the flight back to LA to get my stuff. I don't know if the plan had landed before they started sending out offers to guys who can tackle, because Florida tackled like a flag football team, a semi-professional flag football team last year. And I think that was the biggest thing. It's just fundamental football. And if you're not getting the guy to the ground, what are you doing? So Florida, a lot last year, they were talking about the secondary. Jason Marshall talked about losing his confidence last year. The next thing you have to do is get to the quarterback. Florida was not successful in pressuring the quarterback or getting sacks last year, which probably leads to the secondary having to cover 7-8 seconds. Florida was as bad as, or Florida was worse than every other school except for Temple in terms of getting interceptions. But a lot of that goes hand in hand. If the quarterback, especially at the SEC level, is getting 8 seconds to throw, it's going to be hard to get interceptions. So number one for Florida is tackling, getting guys to the ground. And I think adding Asa Turner from Washington, Traquez Bridges from Oregon, DJ Douglas from Tulane, Pup Howard, who you mentioned, getting Shamar James back healthy. I think that they have addressed that. Another guy, Devin Moore, has only been available for half of the games he's been on campus for in his 2 years at Florida. He's an NFL caliber defensive back if he's healthy. He was able to finally get through an entire offseason healthy. Florida feels really good, and I think I agree with them that the pieces they've added, along with the new coaching and hopefully being able to tackle, will make their defense better. One of the biggest things last year was the defense was so young, and I was talking to Jason Marshall about this, is I lost my confidence. Well, easy to lose your confidence when your starting safeties are a true sophomore who led the team in missed tackles and a true freshman. Now you have that true freshman back as a true sophomore, Jordan Castell, who led the entire defense in snaps played as a true freshman safety. And you pair him with a 6th-year senior who has over 3,000 snaps of experience in Asa Turner. And I think that then allows the cornerback to say, hey, if I get beat, somebody's behind me. I trust that. Not if I get beat, it's now a 60-yard touchdown and I'm on somebody's draft highlight tape. So I think there's so much veteran leadership that they brought in that also you pair with those young guys who on paper, young, but like I said, you have a sophomore who played over 600 snaps. Jordan Castell's not your typical sophomore starting in the SEC.
Nick, let's talk special teams. Trey Smack is back as the – no, thank you. I'm going to make you, Nick.
Okay.
And listen, there's a lot to like about Florida special teams this year. Trey Smack's back at kicker, went 17 of 21 last year on field goals. Jeremy Crawshaw is one of the best punters in the SEC. And Eugene Wilson's a guy who can take it over in the return game and flip a game on its head. Now, let's get to why you don't want to talk about it. They've got to be better here fundamentally. There have been, when you talk about Florida, and I talk about it a lot, you talk about it a lot, the stupid mistakes and self-inflicted wounds. A lot of times this is where it comes. So there's a lot to like and be excited about, Nick, but this is also an area that has to get fixed. Your thought on Florida special teams in 2024. And I appreciate you being willing to talk about it, by the way.
Yeah, there's a ton of metrics that play really well for Florida. They don't return kickoffs. Like they just punt, they just kick the ball into the end zone. So their kickoff coverage unit is really good. They cover punts really well. Jeremy Crawshaw doesn't punt enough. I have a Ray Guy vote, and he always asks me why he doesn't get voted for. Why aren't you voting for me? I'm like, I only get to vote on punters who are eligible, and you haven't punted enough. Despite Florida's offense not being great the last 2 years, Billy Napier likes going forward on 4th down and does that at such a high rate that his punter hasn't been eligible, despite leading the nation or being 2nd or 4th in the nation in net punting at yards, has not been eligible for the award. The biggest issue is organization. Sending 2 guys out in the field with the same jersey. I just saw a clip yesterday. They had 8 guys on the field for a field goal block. You're allowed 11. They had 8. And it's just organization. It's so funny. I spent all last year on both podcasts that I do screaming. One time live on the podcast, I went on Dick's Sporting Goods and found out that the Gainesville Dick's Sporting Goods had a mat with 11 circles on it that you put 11 pairs of feet, and you know that, hey, we have 11 going out into the field for this special teams. And it became a joke when the new co-special teams coordinator, Joe Houston, who came from the New England Patriots, said, hey, we're going to use it. He called it a launch pad. It's a mat. It's a plastic mat that you put on the ground. And it became a joke, but like not a bigger joke than not getting 11 guys on the field. So you do what you have to do. There's NFL teams that use it. And there's so many different things that can happen when you're trying to get special teams on the field. Well, it might be a punt safety cover. It might be a punt block. And then there's two different sets of people. And you have to, in real time, get a bunch of people moving. It's just a visual representation for the coach who is now able, the analyst, who is now able to coach during the game because, of course, nobody across the country was having their analysts or graduate assistants coach at all, because that would have been a foul of NCAA rules. So glad they can start doing it this year, Chris. But Florida's special teams unit was really, really good, and all of it was overshadowed because of the stupidity that crept up every single week. And talking to Florida's coaches, they're like, why is this a thing? And I'm like, it's a thing because you're doing the easy thing so wrong that we can't see all of the hidden yards and all of the advanced analytics, because all we see is that you sent 8 guys out when you can send 11. So the biggest thing for Florida's special teams unit is getting Joe Houston in. I think I've seen him at the first 3 practices that we've been at, really hands-on, working with everyone from the special teams organization, punting, kicking, long snapping, getting the time from the long snapper to the punter, the long snapper to the holder down, so you're not getting punts or kicks blocked. And then just being able to have those guys coaching on the field, not worried about if the camera catches them and they get fined or some sort of NCAA violation. So I think Joe Houston might be the coach that doesn't get talked about enough, but the coach that will probably see the biggest impact from when it comes to Florida special teams.
So, Nick, Florida returns 14 starters this year, 8 on offense, 6 on defense. And let's do something I'm sure nobody's asked you to do. Let's look at the schedule, right? 2024 schedule. We haven't done this enough, talked about Florida's schedule, but it's worth highlighting again. You open up with that game against Miami. Like we mentioned, we're going to be there. Most Florida fans, and I think maybe Miami fans too, have just circled that as, and you got to love this, Nick, when it's like game 1, most important. If we lose, just burn it down. It's over. But it's a massive game. Obviously, the rivalry returns. The Swamp's going to be rocking. Cannot wait to take in that atmosphere. Then you got Samford, like you mentioned, the following week. And you made this point to me, I think it was in Dallas. Every game on the schedule has a storyline. Even Samford, because the last time they were in the Swamp, they scored 52 points. So it's like, even that one, there's something to talk about. But anyways, you get Samford. You open up SEC play against Texas A&M. You're at Mississippi State. UCF comes to town with Gus Malzahn and KJ Jefferson, who I don't need to remind Gator fans what KJ did last year. At Tennessee, always an interesting game. Kentucky, you've got the cocktail party against Georgia. And this begins, by the way, the gauntlet in the back half. Georgia, at Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, at Florida State. Nick, you've been asked about the schedule 100 times. I'm asking you for the 101st time. Give your thoughts on it, because I think you've made a lot of great points. While the schedule's difficult, like there's no question, but maybe it's not quite as daunting as we're making it out to be. From the standpoint, we might get halfway through the year, and a couple of those teams in the back half of the schedule, they might be showing their own problems of their own. So just thoughts on this 2024 slate and what Florida can potentially do with it.
Yeah, I've even asked fans, like, what's the most important game? And a lot of Miami. And that might just be, recency bias. It's the first game. But it's a major rivalry to fans. And so much, I think, psychologically, because it's not an SEC game. It's not going to prevent you from going to Atlanta if you make some kind of crazy run but lose week 1. But Florida has this, we're trying to prove ourselves right, not doubters wrong. And there's plenty of doubters. Probably easier to prove the other 104 guys in the locker room right than the billion doubters you have this year. But the new strength conditioning program from Tyler Miles, I was able to get some inside access and watch some of their workouts and things like that. And I'm a believer in what they're doing. And I think the proof is in the mirror with how the guys look. So that started a belief, and they really, really believe in themselves. And the Florida fans want to hope. They want to believe. And if you lose that Miami game, there is a segment of the fan base that will not come back on Billy Napier's side, outside of Florida finishing the year 12-1. They just won't come back to Billy Napier if you lose that Miami game. But even more so, if you have this belief as a Florida football player and you go out and you get punched in the mouth and lose at home to a rival to start the year, does that belief start to crack? Like, well, shoot, maybe everyone else was also working hard in the offseason, and maybe what we thought was hard work wasn't going to be enough and isn't going to be enough. And then does that start the ball rolling because the schedule only gets more difficult as you go on? So that's why I think that Miami game is so important, not because of anything else other than like psychologically the fan base cannot handle a loss to Miami. And psychologically for the football team, does a loss to Miami start to fester doubt in what their strong belief is, what they can do this year? You can start the year, if you're Florida, winning 5 in a row. You get 2 first-year head coaches. Sanford had a 2-score lead at halftime the last time they came to Gainesville. It was a vibrant third-quarter comeback for the Gators. Lots of coaching going on.
That was the game Dan Mullen danced in the locker room after the game to celebrate, right?
Yeah, a lot of live streaming of your difficult win against Sanford. And Dan told us that, all wins are tough. So you can start 2-0. A&M, I think, is a winnable game. They bring a lot of guys back. They will be very familiar with Florida because they have 2 of their coaches and 2 of their players from Florida that went over there. But Florida should also be very familiar with Texas A&M's defense because Jay Bateman, who is the linebackers coach, their new defensive coordinator, and going to Mississippi State, like the worst thing about that, or most difficult thing about that, is the cowbells. I went one time, needed Advil at halftime. Those were very loud. But another first-year coach, you cannot lose to UCF. And I think UCF is a losable game for Florida. I don't think people are talking enough about, one, KJ Jefferson, but also the backfield. I think you've got 2 guys who ran over 1,300 yards with double-digit touchdowns each in the backfield for the Knights. Gus Malzahn, if he's playing EA College Football 25, has made KJ Jefferson. That's his created player. Outside of Cam Newton, like that's the next guy Gus would create to run his offense. So I think that's a game for Florida that you have to be ready to play. But if you can get through that stretch, I think you can beat Kentucky at home. I don't trust Florida to win away from Gainesville. They're 2-10 the last 2 years when they leave the swamp. I'm a big believer in Nico. However you say his last name, a big believer in Nico. I think he will get every bit out of his game that he can in Josh Heupel's offense. I think that's the type of quarterback who can run, create, and kind of improvise as well as throw the ball. That's exactly what Josh Heupel's offense needs, and I think they're going to be really good with Nico. That's a tough game. Down that back slate, like you mentioned, though, I think Ole Miss went all in on the transfer portal. Their boosters looked around, their collective looked around and said, listen, we got a Jackson Dart coming back. Let's go buy some pieces to put around him, and let's make a run at this 12-team playoff. But they're almost like a hired bunch of mercenaries. These aren't Mississippi kids. And when you play at Mississippi or Mississippi State, a lot of your roster are just Mississippi kids. We talk about all the time how hard it is to go and get a kid to commit if they're from the state of Mississippi to a school like Florida. If they're out of the playoff, like let's say that's week 11, if they're 8-2 or 7-3 heading into that game, like and they might be out of it, and you have the Egg Bowl the next week. Maybe that's a game where they slip up. I don't believe Florida State in Florida State. I think they lost 11 guys. DJU. There's a reason why you're in your 5th year on your 3rd school after being the number 2 quarterback in the country, a consensus 5-star. Career hasn't panned out. I don't think he is Jordan Travis. I could be wrong. I think that's a winnable game. I think LSU, you get LSU at home. You haven't beat LSU in 5 years. But you get LSU at home without the number 2 overall pick and without 2 first-round receivers. That's a easier game, I think, than we're looking at. And Florida's schedule is like shopping at Whole Foods. There's a bunch of brand names, and they're really expensive. But if you open the box, there might be a little less cereal in that box than there had been in the past. So that's kind of the devil's advocate to the schedule is you get some of these teams who maybe are great schools or great brands or had great years last year, but we're not playing the 2023 Florida State Seminoles who had 11 guys drafted, or not playing the 2023 LSU Tigers in Death Valley at night against the number 2 overall pick. So it's more manageable, I think. And that is also with the caveat that it is the SEC schedule and 5 straight weeks of Georgia at Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, at Florida State is not easy, no matter how many ways I try to break it down and say it might be more favorable than we think.
So, Nick, in closing, we talked about the schedule. Year 3 of Billy Napier. I'm curious, again, as we've gotten closer to kickoff, like I mentioned earlier, I feel confident that Billy's going to be back in 2025, right? There's a guy we didn't even talk about, by the way, DJ Lagway, who is behind Graham Mertz, who's probably going to see some snaps, who you think there could be a very bright future with him under center when you look at, just the type of player he is. I've heard people compare him to Lamar Jackson. Like, this is a guy with some big-time talent, and that'll be Billy's first quarterback that's his, right? So there's belief that Billy can be the guy long-term. When you look at this season, wins need to happen, but my question to you, Nick, is this. Is success in 2024, is it so much about hitting a win total, or is it more about the way they look? Because like you mentioned, it's not just the fact you went 5-7. It's how you got there. And you know as well as I do, not every 5-7, 6-6, 7-5, they're not all created equally. So like when you look at this season, determining success, what's going to have Florida being, like you mentioned, hopeful and optimistic moving forward, what is it in 2024 that you need to see from the Gators?
I think you said it perfectly. There's not a black and white number. Now listen, 2-10, that's black and white. You're gone. 4-8, I think that's black and white. You're probably gone. But there's a real world scenario where 6-6 makes you feel better than 7-5. 7-5 is a big improvement. But what if those 5 losses are a blowout in Knoxville, a blowout in Jacksonville, a blowout in Austin, you lose to Miami, and you lose to Florida State? Now you've lost to 2 of the 3 in-state teams, and you've either taken steps back or looked the exact same. You've lost by 20 points to Georgia in each of the last 2 years. Do that again and make that a 60-point differential in 3 years. That doesn't feel good, even at 7-5. People won't feel that the team is progressing. You can go 6-6, but get that Kentucky monkey off your back. Maybe beat Tennessee on the road. Look competitive in Austin. Look competitive in Jacksonville. So I think it's so much more than just what's the win total, what's the loss total, what do those wins look like, what do those losses look like? And that'll mean so much more to me than just the actual number. Because I've said it a couple times this offseason, there's a scenario where I'm writing more positively about this team that's 6-6 than I am about a team that's 7-5, but has the same struggles. I need to see Florida improve in some key areas, like look competent on the road. You haven't even looked competent on the road outside of a trip last year up to Columbia, South Carolina, which for all intents and purposes is a game I've seen Florida lose multiple times. But they come out and they win that game. Look competent. But South Carolina wasn't any good last year. Look competent on the road at Tennessee. Go to Mississippi State and take care of business. That's probably one of the few games Florida will be favored in. Don't go on the road and flop. So there's definitely, in my mind, not a, hey, he has to win 7 games. And honestly, 7-5, and he will still be under 500 after 3 years. And 6-6, certainly under 500. So to me, it's much more how the wins and losses look. Because listen, Ron Zook got fired for far less than what Billy Napier's program has done the last 2 years. So I think it's all about what the wins and more specifically what the losses look like than the totals.
Nick De La Torre, Gators Online, does a fantastic job, again, covering all things Florida. Nick, let folks know where they can check out all your great work.
GatorsOnline.com. We are just gearing up. I will be taking a little step away with the baby coming in September, but we have a ton of guys there with Keith Niebuhr, Corey Bender, Zach Albaverdi to pick up the slack, and I'll still be putting some stuff there as sleep and time allows with the baby girl coming in September. But yeah, it's an exciting time huge kickoff. Florida's gotten 3 straight years of some premium first games, no Southeastern Westerly Tech. So you can check us out on Gators Online. Check out our YouTube as well. And then on Twitter, you can find me being sassy and snarky at Torre.
And I also, Nick, want to highlight, by the way, the Stadium and Gale podcast. You are a co-host of that. I want to make sure we show them some love. You guys have some massive convos upcoming, I think, with like Urban Meyer and some Gator legends. So, again, I want to show you, Dan, the rest of that crew love, because y'all do a great job there, too, with Stadium and Gale.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. So, Nick, we'll definitely do it again soon, my friend. Appreciate you taking the time, and looking forward to kickoff.
You got it. Looking forward to hosting you in Hogtown.
Let's go. Let's go.